Welcome to the She's Bold podcast. I'm Beth Whitman. Hey, thanks for joining me for another episode of the She's Bold podcast. I think you're really going to enjoy today's episode with Chris Mackay. Chris and I recorded this with an audience at the Adventure Hub and Winery in Seattle. Not only was this a lot of fun to record live, but it gave us a chance to do something a little different, which was to take questions from the audience and answer them right on the spot. Chris is a traveler to the core, as you'll hear in this conversation. Now, I've known Chris for probably 10 or more years, but I had never heard her backstory, which I found so incredibly fascinating. Chris was heavily influenced by her mom. And by the way, I've got to have her mom on the podcast based on what Chris has told me now. Now, her mom was not only a traveler, and she took Chris to India when she was 16, but she surrounded herself and the family with shamans and Rinpoches and all sorts of interesting indigenous peoples. Chris's love of international travel and the natural world, obviously it came from this upbringing, but that, along with her concern about the negative impacts of tourism on culture and the environment, this led Chris to co-found Crooked Trails in 1998. Now, this tour company specializes in community-based tourism, and that means that which is focused on and supports the local cultures. But Chris's concern for the environment has extended well beyond Crooked Trails. It's led her to co-found Travelers Against Plastic, TAP, an organization which aims to educate global travelers about the harmful impacts of using disposable plastic water bottles, something that drives me crazy. Instead, it encourages us all to use alternative methods to consume water while we're traveling. Now, we get into that and the impact of travel on the environment and cultures in this episode. We talk about so much, and I know that you're going to be super inspired by it. Before we get into that conversation, a quick reminder to please tell your friends about the She's Bold podcast. Word of mouth is the number one way that a podcast audience grows, and without your help, I would not be here bringing you these fantastic conversations. Also, please make sure you're subscribed and take a moment to give it a quick rating or review. All of these help with the ranking of the show, which gets it more visibility, and then ultimately that means these messages in these episodes find their way to more people. You can support the show on Patreon by going to shesboldpodcast.com/Patreon. You'll notice there's no advertising on this podcast. That's because I rely on supporters like you to help me pay the podcast bills. Now, podcasts are free, and I believe they should remain that way. But if you find value in these conversations, I would be ever so grateful if you'd show your support. Becoming a supporter gets you access to bonus audio content, which is usually a question I ask the guest after the main portion of the episode. And those are a lot of fun to listen to. Again, this bonus content is only for Patreon supporters, and really, you can support the show for as little as $1 a month. Finally, I'm working on another Ask Me Anything episode. If you have a question you'd like answered on a future episode, send me an email at beth@shesboldpodcast.com or leave a message at 877-280-5170. With that, please enjoy this conversation with Chris Mackay. Thanks for your patience and thanks for being here. Appreciate it. I always like to kind of drop in on a conversation with something maybe a little bit innocuous that isn't totally pertinent. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put Chris on the spot here because her phone rang earlier. And I said, I think that's your phone ringing. Let's see, let me bring it to you. And I brought it to her, and there was no name on it. So when I ignore those, luckily she picked it up because what happened?
Oh, so I have 12 people heading to Peru tonight. And one of the families of 5, they're at the checking in, and they won't let them check in because the passport of the daughter expires in July. So it's like 4 months left on it, but not 6. And actually, I've never had anybody not let him through, but they're being a stickler this time. And he's like, and in this heavy Russian accent, Grace, what am I supposed to do? And I'm like, oh God, okay, let's see. And I mean, in reality, we don't have a choice here. I mean, they're not going to let him on. And so they have to go back home, go to the passport agency tomorrow, pay extra money, get an emergency passport in Manhattan, see if they can get flights for tomorrow. And then I've got to change, everything tomorrow to get the flights to get them into Cusco to get their trek on time. So just a little bit stressed. I'm like, I'll call you back when I'm done with this podcast. It could be midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning your time. Is that okay? Don't worry. Just call me. And I'm like, okay. It's when you travel, it's part of what happens, right? But we were talking about this, the importance of these lessons. If everything goes right, you generally don't learn a lot. Right? It's you move, you grow, you learn when it's hard and often when it's painful. And this could be quite painful tonight when I have to make all the adjustments, which of course we're responsible for. I saw his passport and didn't register that either. And that's ultimately my responsibility. So I have to take responsibility for that and make it right to the best of my ability. But some of the things that happen when you travel.
Yeah, really good lesson. For those of the people who don't know exactly what you do and why you're sending a group of people to Peru, can you talk about Crooked Trails?
Yeah, so back in like 1996, I was in Thailand and kind of traveling around and ended up in these villages up north. And we were on this group. It was kind of like an activist group, and you trekked from village to village. And while you were there, what we were supposed to be doing was taking down the comments of the people who were there, who were hill tribe people, and so they were marginalized by most of Thai society, and they're not allowed citizenship, and they suffer tremendously because of these things, economically and culturally. So we were supposed to listen to their stories and then gather these stories after a week in the villages and go back to Bangkok and present this to Parliament and be activists. And so that's what we did. And to be honest with you, I don't really know how much good this all did. But the gentleman who led these said, I just get the sense that, you're really enjoying yourself out here. And I'm actually going to be looking at working in some different hill tribes next year. And we're looking for somebody to kind of take this trip over. Would you be interested? Yeah. So I remember coming back home, talking to my future business partner, Tammy Leland. I said, listen, we should go back to Thailand next year because they're going to lead this trip one last time, and they're going to let a whole bunch of people on it, and then they're going to pick the people that they think would be best to lead trips. We, of course, will be chosen, and then we will take it over. And that's exactly what happened.
And is that how Crooked Trails started then?
It is, because the next year we started taking over these. Were supposed to be these social activist trips, but Tammy and I were like, you know what? We're much more into culture and environment. So let's not march from village to village. Let's spend all our time in one village and see what we can do in that community and really get to know these people. And during that whole process, we thought, this is kind of like a mini Peace Corps experience where we get to hang out in this village and do something for them. They had asked us to build a community center. And that's what we ended up doing. And that was our very first Crooked Trails trip in Thailand in 1998. And it grew from there. So
what was your background that you thought that would be of interest not only to you, but to other people? Like what did you bring to the table that made that make sense?
Wow, that's a really great question. I think, my mom brought me to India when I was 16. She wanted to go see some guru in the Himalayas. and I just got the bug then. And I became a guide, and I was a wilderness guide for a good 20 years, working with Native American kids off inner city and reservations. And so I was very much steeped in culture already. And Mom had been traveling the world too, and just really infusing a lot of that. Like, you never knew who was going to be in our house. Like, get this, I remember coming home one day, and there's this guy, this squat Mexican guy standing in our living room, incredibly powerful looking. And I'm looking at him, and Mom says, Chris, this is Tlaquielel. He's an Aztec shaman, and he's going to be hanging out with us for a week. And I'm like, okay, Tlaquielel, right? Like, I'm 16.
Where did you grow up?
We moved every year. I went to 4 high schools, 4 junior high schools, 3 grade schools. I mean, Mom, I don't know, she had a feather up her butt. We were always somewhere.
Where was it? What state?
Oh, all over. Washington, Colorado, New Mexico.
I'm so fascinated. Is she still alive?
Oh, yeah.
Can she come on the podcast? I want her on the podcast also.
She was fascinating.
So how did do you have any idea how she met these people? Like if she were moving around so much?
Yeah, she traveled a lot herself, and she got involved in all these kind of high spiritual circles. So she would be invited to Tibet or South Africa and meeting these people. Like she just started moving in this circle of spiritual leaders. And so they started to know that she was a contact in the United States. So they just started circling through our house.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, I had a real different upbringing. Mom would hand me these books, and kids just weren't reading those. But
well, that completely explains, because I think you're quite unusual in terms of that, and that's not the answer that I expected. Like, kind of where that background came from, but it makes perfect sense.
It does, yeah. And in all honesty, the reason that I went to Thailand that first time was about 4 months earlier. I was up in Canada. And I had just finished working on a pipeline, right? I just picked up some random job. And it was over, and I thought I'll go to Banff, and I'm going to hang out for a little bit and figure out what I want to do with my life. So I got some snowshoes and a snow skis, and I'm camping out, and it's snowing, and I'm all by myself in November in Banff. And I'm having like this crisis, like, I don't know what to do with my life. So what do? You call your mom. So I call Mom on the telephone, and I'm telling her, Mom, I don't know what I'm doing. And she said, well, honey, I was invited to Thailand to represent Native American perspectives on materialism. But I don't think that I can go, but you should go. And I'm like, Mom, I don't feel like capable of representing Native America. Yeah, I have Native American blood, but that's just too far. She's like, Chris, I will get a message from an elder. You just read the message at the conference. And I'm like, okay. That's how I ended up in Thailand. And part of the whole experience was to go up into these hill tribes. And it all just kind of snowballed from there.
Wow. You have a biology background, is that right?
I do. I have a geography and biology undergraduate, and then a master's in environmental education and science. And
do you feel like you bring all of that to the table when you work on a program for Crooked Trails, or do you feel like that's just left behind you and didn't serve as much purpose as you thought it might?
It's always there because I look at the world through that lens. And so I think from my own personal fascination and passion, when I go to another environment, I'm just so enthralled. Beth is going to go hike the 5 deserts. Like, she's going to go run 150 miles in 5 different deserts in 1 year. 150 miles in 5 different countries. And my first thought was, wow, I would love to go to those deserts. Because I'm fascinated by geography and biology.
In an air-conditioned vehicle.
No, actually, I don't need the AC. I'm actually not a big fan of it. But running across them, no thank you. But really getting into them, I was so jealous of this thought. So I think it's a filter that I see the world through. Definitely. And then the education piece comes in because I've always been interested in helping people kind of broaden their horizons, and their viewpoint of things. And so I love sticking people in situations that are kind of push them a little bit, not too much. I don't want people freaking out on my trips, but I don't want them to be comfortable either. I always tell people, if you just want to be comfortable, don't come on my trip. I don't travel to be comfortable. I travel to engage. And that sometimes can be a little, it can kind of push you, a little irritating.
Yeah. You have actually a process where you have to accept people into a Crooked Trails program. Is that right? People can't just register. They have to fill out a form and you have to kind of vet them. Is that?
Kind of. It's a business too. I got to get money in the door. So I accept pretty much everybody. I do. I think that what's on the website and what people know about Crooked Trails kind of vets it from the get-go.
Right. If they have to go through the process of filling something out, then they're going to give a second thought as to whether it's for them. Yeah, and they kind of
look at what we're doing. They're like, oh, they know if that's for them or not. For some people, they get on our website, that's exactly what I was looking for. But I'm sure some people get on and go, oh, that's not for me, and that's totally fine. I think I've only told a handful of people that I don't think we're a good choice. But
Wander Tours is the place to go. She sends them to me. I know you, Chris. I know.
Hopefully you can deal with this person.
We'll talk offline about that. To switch a little bit, but to pivot in, I think, what's an appropriate direction, in terms of the biology and the filter, literally the filter that you use. Let's talk about TAP and Travelers Against Plastic and the environment, because I do think that that's the filter that you use to see so much, because you go and you see a culture, you see an environment, and you want to travel gently, and you've made some really incredible inroads in terms of how to make that happen, like really being a responsible traveler. So can you talk about TAP?
I mean, since the get-go, when we first started Crooked Trails, Tammy and I determined that anybody traveling with us needed to, kind of walk the talk environmentally. And one of those things was you needed to travel prepared to clean your own water, that no traveler should leave a trail of plastic water bottles behind them everywhere they go. It's just irresponsible. And so that's just how we've always run it. But after 10 years of doing it, I started looking around and I thought, God, everybody else is still carrying plastic water bottles. I think they just don't know. And that all of those techniques that are on that table, those are all available, right? It's super easy to clean your own water, really easy. So I thought we should start a campaign. So Tammy and Angela, who also works with Crooked Trails, we sat down at Starbucks right over there about, right up First Avenue. And we came up with a campaign. Angela came up with the name TAP, Travelers Against Plastic. And we just thought we need to try and get other tour operators on board with helping their clients make this decision. As you know, recently in the last couple of years, especially in the last year or two, the whole plastics issues just, hit a crescendo. I mean, it's unbelievable the amount that's out there. And so I really feel like it's more important than ever for all of us to think about our choices, and especially when we're traveling, because you're an ambassador out there at that point, in my opinion. And if you go into a hotel and they hand you a plastic water bottle as soon as you walk in, you can say, you know what, thank you very much. I really appreciate the gesture, but I am prepared. And let them know that, be talking to people so that they recognize that you care about that. That's an issue for you. And, that you don't want to see a plastic water bottle in your room.
It is so difficult to change habits, though, because I'll have a group of women of 15, and I tell them the same thing. We support TAP, and we really don't want you, water can be available, but we don't want you to use it. And the tour operators that we use in the countries, they're like, hey, we've got water for you, on the bus. And it's like, no, I don't want you to have, I appreciate it, but I don't want you to have water so readily available, because I want people to be able to just bring their own bottle and purify it themselves. But even then, even all the talking that I do, still, everyone's got their plastic bottles. A lot of them do. Half of them do. It's a really difficult habit to change. Even at home, even here, it is really difficult.
It is challenging. And I have to admit, I mean, last time I went to Nepal, my partner's essentially there, and I was with a couple people. I had a group of 5, and he opens up the van doors to put our luggage in, and there's a bunch of bottles of plastic water bottles. And he's like, would you all like plastic water? Would you all he didn't say plastic, would you all like water? And he looks at me, and he's like, oh, sorry, Chris. I'm like, this is exactly what we've been talking about. So yeah, I think it's hard to change, but to me, it's all about education and just walking the talk and being an example. I don't feel like I need to be running around shaming everybody, but you just keep walking the talk. And I can't tell you how many times I've had people come up to me when I was about to drink the water from a fountain or something, or some village well, and they'll be like, you can't drink that water. And I'm like, oh, yes, I can. Watch me, and clean it. And they're like, how did you just do that? Steri pens are so much fun. They're so easy to use. And so I think it's a continual effort, of broadening people's awareness. But I will tell you, I remember one woman that she was an avid traveler, travel writer, traveled all over the world, but always and would never buy a plastic water bottle here in the United States. But when she travels, she thought, well, of course I have to. I can't drink the water. Hadn't occurred to her to travel prepared. And I told her she was getting ready to go to Ethiopia. And I said, how are you going to clean your water when you're there? Because I asked people that. It's not too personal, but how do you intend to clean your water? And she's like, what are you talking about? You can't drink the water then. I'm like, no, it's super simple. Just, have you ever heard of a Steri pen? No. And so, of course, I grab it because we're at my house, and I just shove it in the water. Light goes on. I spin it around. I'm like, that's all it takes. 90 seconds. Your water's clean. And she said, are you serious? I'm like, take mine. Take it with you. I'm not traveling in the next 6 weeks. Just head out. And I remember when she came back, she said, she wrote to me. She's a great writer. She said, I am so ashamed when I think about all the plastic water bottles I'm responsible for over the last, 20 years of travel. It would fill this entire room. And she said, I'm a convert. I'll never do it again. So I think once people make the step, they don't look back, and then they become an ambassador. And I do believe in the 100th monkey phenomenon. I think when enough people get it, we all do it. And it won't be too far in the distant future when it's actually a source of embarrassment to walk around with a plastic water bottle. It's kind of like walking around with a cigarette right now. You kind of, there's a better choice,
And one thing to remember too is, especially if you're traveling to a developing country, many of them don't have even the ability to recycle. So you'll just see people, we did it here in the 70s, right? I remember my parents driving down the highway and throwing garbage out the window. Sorry, I'm sure hopefully everybody else has a memory of that too.
We did.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah.
My parents weren't the only ones. But yeah, so that is a really common thing. And then you go to a developing country and they're just throwing plastic water bottles in the rivers, which we would never, ever, never, ever think to do because we've been conditioned out of that. But it's not the case elsewhere. If you haven't seen it already, watch a movie called Plastic Ocean. It's a documentary, and just watch the first 20 minutes of it. That's literally all I could watch. And before it changed my life. Really changed my life and my decision-making process. And it's just watch it. Yeah. Pretty crazy. So much of what you've done is you've created through the creation of Crooked Trails. It's really for your travelers and just for people who are following you too, is you're trying to avoid the negative effects of tourism on culture and the environment. I think that hopefully that encapsulates what you're doing with Crooked Trails. Would you say that?
Yeah, I would. Yeah, definitely. But I there's a part of this that I have to admit, just openly, there's a lot of hypocrisy that I feel in this field, because we all want to go have this amazing experience in this remote area with these untouched cultures. But the second you're in there touching them, and then everybody wants in there, and it's just, it changes everything.
And we want to post it on Instagram, but then we don't want anybody else going to that location either.
Or, like I have these great, amazing communities we work with in Peru, right? And so they worked really hard to create this program of tourism, and they want more people to come. And I want more people to come so they can have this economic opportunity and own some of, the tourism dollars that are just flooding through Peru, but they don't get any of it. And so we want to put tourism in the hands of the people who are affected by it. At the same time, I quite honestly don't want to see 1,000 people a day going through that village. It would change everything. It would just ruin it. And so I find myself going, well, where's the balance there? And I know that the worst thing I can do for this planet, which I'm deeply in love with and concerned about tremendously, is getting on an airplane and flying somewhere. And yet I do that, so we try and encourage people to offset their carbons and to be responsible about those kinds of things. And I keep telling myself, oh, well, the benefits that they get, they come back more enlightened and aware and responsible. And sometimes I think I'm just trying to talk myself into it because I love travel. But there are negative impacts and on culture, on economies, and on the environment. And I think it's something that we all have to come to grips with. And I don't know what the answer is. I really don't. But I think about this a lot.
Well, what I would say to you, Chris, is that what you bring back after a trip and you share with people, whether it's people here or it's people in your personal community, your family, your life, people at Crooked Trails, you're giving back, and you can only do that in the way that you do because you travel. And that's, and that's the story I tell myself too. Because
it's a story.
Yeah, because I think I'm a more valuable person to the people around me because I bring the experiences from my travels to my home, to my partner, to my neighbors,
to your clients,
to my clients too.
I'm hoping that they have that same experience.
Well, absolutely. But that's secondary. What I'm saying is that anybody in this room who travels, who isn't running a tour company, can take the information, can take the experience that you have when you're out there and bring it home and affect other people. So there's that ripple effect.
And I think there's that recognition of where you've been, like it because it makes the world bigger. I remember when the Nepali earthquakes happened, right? And for me, like Nepal's my has a place in my heart. And when these earthquakes happen, of course, I reached out to everybody I brought to Nepal. And I'm like, give me money. We got to get to the villages now. They've been devastated. And I remember one guy reaching back immediately and sending money. And he said, Chris, this is the first time in my life that there's been a face on the disaster. And you did that for me. And because he spent a week living in this village, we were building a school. Like he was in tears at thought that the home that he lived in was completely crushed and demolished, and the people that he stayed with were now starving. And I thought, it's so true. It does that for us, huh? Because, like, when the awful disaster happened in Haiti, I remember thinking, of course I gave money, but I'd never been to Haiti. There was no face on that disaster for me. So there's something about traveling and sharing it, and then sharing it, that right. it becomes part of you. And I think that's critically important because it connects us to the world, and in a way that's going to help us care about the world, whether it's the people or the environment or the relationships. I there is that part of it. That's where my struggle with the balance comes from.
You'd mentioned before, just kind of describing a little bit about Crooked Trails and working with these local people there. And I know you call it community-based travel. Can you describe an experience that someone might have on one of your tours because it's community-based? Like how are you working with the local people?
Yeah, so in all the countries that we work in, we do work with a community. And people can choose to go into the community or not. I have a lot of people that are like, I just want to see Machu Picchu. And I'm like, well, okay. But I try and talk them into having this other experience. Even if it's just for a day, if they can spend some time in the community, I honestly think it will change their life. And but sometimes it depends on the community. Some of them are a little rougher than others. But I did take people, for example, into the village, this favorite village I had that was literally flattened by the earthquake in Nepal. So we were sleeping in tents next to the people who were also homeless. And so you're eating, what I tell people is you're going to eat, poop, and sleep like the locals. And if you can't handle that, don't come. Because I'm not going to have them fix extra special food for you. And there's not any cell service. And you're going to be in a squatter toilet. And there's probably some horrid spider in the corner. And
no, not a spider.
Yes. And I remember, like, I've had so many conversations with clients the day before we end up going into the village because they're terrified. They're like, oh my God, we have so much comfort in our lives and so much personal space, and we have our own hygiene issues or whatever it is, that we feel like this is the minimum that I can handle. And yet 100% of the time, the people have gone in there and had an absolutely remarkable experience. And when they come out, they always tell me that was the most amazing experience I've ever had. And I think part of it has to do with the fact that they realize the fear that they had of what they might experience going in was completely invalid. That all the things that they experienced were exactly what they thought they were going to be, but it wasn't scary. It was actually just, oh, this is how the people live. I can live like this too. There was this really interesting realization that they had. I'm sure you've had it too, where you just go, these are just people too. Like you look at a picture of them and it all just looks too much. Like, oh, I could never live like that. But they're just people. And you would be living like that as well. And when you kind of understand that, it shifts something in you. And it's profound. It truly is profound.
Well, I think part of it, too, is getting to know a person, a local person. And, you're human just like I am, and you have the same issues that I do. Yeah. And so when you have that kind of a connection, then it makes it a little bit different or a little bit easier.
Absolutely. I remember talking to one gentleman who went on a trip with me to Nepal, and he had inherited some money the year before, and he decided he was going to quit his job and travel around the world. And the last thing he was doing was Nepal with us. And we were leaving the village after a week, and which is a long stay, I will admit. But we were leaving, and he was sitting in the back of the vehicle, and he was crying. And I said, are you okay? And he said, I'm just realizing that I spent the entire year traveling the globe, and I never met a single local.
Whoa.
He never did it. He had guides. He had a lot of fun. He talked to taxi drivers or this or that, but meet like you talk about, engage with, get to know, have compassion for. It didn't happen in a year because he'd just been on tours, staying in hotels.
That's sad.
I know. But the beautiful thing was he did have it in the end, and he made a choice that changed his life. And you know, it was a really great thing.
Yeah. And hopefully he's telling people. That's the ripple effect.
Yes.
So then hopefully he's telling people about that. And the next person that travels that he knows will have a different experience.
Exactly.
For sure. So how do you, when you get, you mentioned some kind of buzzwords to me, comfort, people who have kind of like a minimum level, like I can only stay in a 4-star hotel. How do you get people past that to accept a different level? Like, because there is fear there, and it's uncomfortable. How do you get people to kind of stretch and get beyond that? Do you have to just let them get through it themselves, or do you kind of guide them, coach
I think it's
them?
baby steps, to be honest with you. I mean, if somebody has very rigid expectations about what they want out of a trip, I think you have to let them have that, but then ask them, you know, would you like to experience just one little thing? Because I think if you just blast open the doors for them, it might work.
What I do.
But it could be really shocking. Sometimes it's just one little experience that opens the door, and it's just that much, but that's a lot of light that comes in, and it just starts to slowly open more and more. I'm hoping that sometimes this is the first trip with this kind of experience, and that future trips add on to it. What I tell people is I like I said earlier, I don't want them to focus on being comfortable, but I also don't want them freaked out. But I do know that you need to be on the edge to really engage, right? What do they say? If you're not on the edge, you're taking up too much space.
I haven't heard that. That's good.
I love it.
So I'm going to tell you a couple of stories about myself and then get your feedback on it, because 2 stories that relate to each other. I was in Nepal. It was actually 30 years ago. It was 1989. And I was trekking through there. And I remember, backpacker, no money, staying hut to hut, trekking the Langtang trek in Nepal. And I remember going to these little huts, and there were other backpackers there that were traveling with their own coffee, like their own coffee press. So 30 years ago, whatever that was at that point, but it was a little coffee press. They were Israeli. And I just remember thinking, like, are you kidding me? Like, you're backpacking in your precious space. You have to have your coffee, your own, very own coffee, and you can't deal with the local tea or whatever is being served. And I just thought that was so crazy. So fast forward 30 years, and I'm in Morocco a couple of weeks ago. And I find now that my luggage I can wear the same clothes, over and over. I don't care about that. But my luggage is now filled with my protein powder, my electronics to a certain degree, my podcasting equipment, my protein bars, my decaf coffee and my decaf tea. And so by the end of the trip, my bag is much lighter because I've eaten through everything. And I just thought it makes me feel better when I mean, like physically feel better, not just like, oh, these are my things. I feel better having them here. But literally my body feels better if I have protein, and which was really difficult for me to get in Morocco because I'm a vegetarian. So it was difficult for me to get enough protein there. So I had my own things. And I think I'm no different than those people that I saw 30 years ago carrying their own coffee. I understood that comfort level. So that is a question. It's like, where do you draw the line between knowing what is good for you, like what makes you feel comfortable? And for one person, it might be their full case of makeup. For me, it was my protein powder, and my protein bars. But where do you kind of figure that out of like, what's comfort because I'm insecure, and what's comfort because I need this to make me feel better?
One of the things that I tell people when they're getting ready to travel, I mean, protein actually is an issue because a lot of the places that we go to, it's just not available, and it can be a big part of somebody's diet.
If you're vegetarian,
or even if you're a meat eater and you're going to Nepal, I mean, and you're trekking is a dal bhat, you don't get it. So
I'd be so happy with that, by the way.
I know. But I do tell people to prepare for those things. Like, you're not going to get any meat, or all you're going to get is meat, and, or what have you. But I also feel like there's nothing more important when you're traveling than to be healthy. That's critical. You've got to take care of yourself. And so what I tell people is whatever your routine is that makes you healthy at home, figure out a way to bring some of that with you so that you do keep your health optimized. Like if you do yoga every day, then do some yoga. It doesn't have to be a whole hour, but do some yoga every day, or do whatever it is that keeps you mentally and physically like intact, because traveling can be hard on you in a bunch of different ways, right? And so you've got to keep yourself like together. And if having your protein powder is one of the ways that you do it, then have it. Don't judge yourself for it. I really do feel that way. But there is something to be said for just letting go sometimes, like sometimes I'll travel and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to bring almost nothing this time. I'm just going to see how it goes, right? And sometimes I regret that choice, but sometimes it's a lot of fun.
I can do that with my clothes, no problem. And it's really liberating. It is.
Liberating. I remember one time I had to down to Mexico. It was just a short trip. It was like 10 days, but I showed up and my friend was picking me up down there, and he runs trips. And I showed up with a little tiny day pack, and he's like, oh, okay, let's get your bag. And I'm like, this is it. And he's like, are you serious? He's like, oh God, I wish everybody traveled like that. And I'm like, actually, this is a test, right? Like, I don't always travel like this, but yeah, you end up finding that, and I think too with electronics and all of the gear and then the plugins and the adapters, I mean, half the weight of your pack is all this stuff that enables you to somehow
stay connected. Hey,
it.
That's actually another great thing. And I think I've talked about this on the podcast before too, is that I live in West Seattle and we have like the best blog over there, the West Seattle blog, and it's microblog, and you hear a helicopter overhead and you can log on and they've already told you, there's a manhunt or there's an accident or something. It's absolutely amazing.
The best blog in the United States, or the most active neighborhood blog in the United States is West Seattle.
It is really awesome.
I live there too.
Yeah, but I will tell you this. My neighbors, love you, David and Lee, if you're listening, they go to Hawaii. Like they'll go for months at a time, and they'll tell me like, oh yeah, well, we just kept up with everything on the West Seattle blog. And I think, oh man, you're in Hawaii. You've got palm trees and beaches and all this great stuff. Why keep up with all that? I do find myself doing it as well. You got a little time at night and you're scrolling through to see what's happening in the neighborhood. But it is so important, I believe, to unplug and just to stay away, especially the news today, like what comes just across your news feed. Stay out of it and immerse yourself in the culture and just dive in. And that, I think that's so critical, and it's so easy to check out. Really, really easy.
We all know it. Every single person in this room knows that if you didn't bring your phone and you stayed totally present, you'd have a better trip. Who has not read that? And how many people have done it? And raise your hand if you've done it. Yes. Okay, I have too. It's the best experience ever. And check out.
I know. And look how many people are totally present right here too. It's beautiful.
The phones are, I remember the first time I headed up to Everest Base Camp, and there was nothing. I mean, once you left Lukla, that was it. And it was fantastic, and then I come back like 15 years later and there's cell towers and everyone's on cell phones and there's internet all the way up and people are, posting their selfies from the top. And I don't know.
Yeah.
I kind of couldn't help that they were kind of missing out, but that's their way of expressing it, and I don't want to judge it too much. Everyone's got their own thing about how they're traveling and how they're relating. And for whatever reason, maybe they're a blogger and they have to be doing that, or I don't know.
One thing I will say that I feel like has kept me closer in touch with my travels and the destination is that last year I bought a new camera. I bought a Sony, was it RX10 IV, and it's an all-in-one, meaning it doesn't have a detachable lens. It's just got the lens right on the body. And I know some people will say, no, I just want to experience it and I don't want the camera between me and the subject. No, not for me. I get deeper with the subject. I get deeper with the destination because I'm taking photos, and then it's got the setup so that I can just connect the photos right over to my iPhone. So at night I just do that transfer, and at night, instead of looking looking at the West Seattle blog, I scroll through my photos and I do kind of an editing process. And it helps me to reflect on the day, and really, it does really help me deepen the experience. And it's been an amazing process. It's only been about 8 months, 7 months or something since I've been doing this. And it's been like a game changer for me in terms of the depth of the experience.
I know a lot of people who experience their travel through photography. That is it for them, and it's extremely meaningful. Yeah, I think there's two sides to every coin. That's why you just can't judge. Everyone travels in their own way. And some people experience it through music, and some through photography, and some through activism or volunteerism or sports, whatever it is, or a mix of all of them. Yeah, running.
Yeah.
Running.
Hey, I want to go back before we get too far away from it. I want to go back to something that we were kind of skirting around, and I want to get a little bit deeper into it. So you were talking about like whatever makes you feel good, like do that, kind of incorporate that. If it makes you feel good at home, incorporate that, which then leads to like building confidence when you're traveling. You're talking about taking little baby steps, like don't do a deep dive into a destination or a tour if it's going to be a little bit scary for you, but have that confidence. And earlier this week we had a chat and we talked about building confidence, and you brought up just such a beautiful point about how when we're kids, we're doing that all the time. Can you elaborate, kind of go back to that and elaborate on that a little bit more? Because I just thought it was so beautiful.
I don't you feel, I'm 56 right now. I'll be 57 in October. And I just recognize that as I'm getting older and I'm looking around at people my age, I'm just recognizing that people stop doing things that are new, that we tend to go on repeat, and we're doing a lot of the same things, and they could be disguised in a slightly different thing, but for the most part, they're the same things. And we're not doing things that really challenge us or scare us or that are new to us. And in my opinion, all you're doing is growing old. And I don't intend to just grow old. I want to grow wise. I want to be the person that is wise. And the only way you become wise is to continually to do things that you've never done, that you challenge yourself. And that is the only way to build confidence. It's the only way. You have to do something you don't know you can do. And so I'm always doing that. And I make a point of it. I just feel like with that confidence comes this ability to a number of things. One is to understand who I truly am, but it also helps me be a more compassionate, understanding person, believe it or not, because I'm it allows me to fail again and again. I have no problem with failing. I'm constantly trying things I have never done. And I just get out there and I do it because it builds that confidence, and it allows me to feel like I'm still alive and living my life and going for it. I'm going to be 100, dang it. I know it. Everybody, all the women in my family are that old, and I've got a lot of living left to do. And I do not want to be the person in 50 years that I am right now. God, I want to be better. I want to be more knowledgeable and compassionate and understanding and intelligent and wise. And that doesn't happen if I just go, okay, this is good enough. And I'm so amazed. At people, like, I love what you're doing right now, Beth, because I'm just like, holy cow, she's out there. This thing that she's doing, just running all over the world. She doesn't know if she can do this.
I'll explain. Do you want me to take a minute and explain what it is?
Yeah, but she's already committed herself to doing it. Just the idea and that she has committed herself to doing that is building confidence, right? To say, I have no idea if I can do this. This is so insane. I'm going to do it.
So what she's talking about, there's actually a couple things that's coming up in September. So I ran my first marathon at 50, and it was to that point of, I thought it was something that I could never do. So I thought, okay, what's something I can't do? Or I told myself I can't do? It's run a marathon. So I started running really when I was in my late 40s. Did my first marathon at 50. I ran 5 marathons that year. I ran what's called a quadzilla, which is 4 marathons in 4 days here in Seattle over Thanksgiving. What? Somebody's shaking their head. People are shaking their heads. And then what I've decided to do is this September, I'm running, it's called the Epic 5 in Hawaii. It's 5 ultra marathons, so it's 50K, which is 31 miles. 5 of those in 5 days on 5 Hawaiian islands. So you run in the morning, you jump on a plane, you go to the next island, you overnight, you run the next morning, 50K. You jump on a plane, you go to the next island, you overnight, and you do that for 5 things. Boy, everyone's just looking at each other like, but I'm doing that in preparation for something else. That's just the training runs. So next year, 2020, I'm doing what's called the 4 deserts. Go home, go to Netflix and watch Desert Runners. And it's all about the 4 deserts. It's 250K, which is 150 miles across 4 different deserts. So the first one is the Namib in Namibia. So I'll be running, I think it's 7 days, 6 or 7 days. It's a little unclear to me, but it doesn't matter, right? Whatever. It's 150 miles in 6 or 7 days across the Namib desert. And I have to carry everything on my back except for water. I'll get replenished. But for that whole time, I have to carry a tent, my clothes, all my food for that time. And I do this run. And then a couple months later, I do the Gobi in Mongolia and China. Same thing, 150 miles. And then I go to the Atacama in Chile and then Antarctica in November. So I'm doing the Grand Slam. A lot of people only do one of those in a year. I'm doing all 4. So so that's the plan. Oh gosh. Oh.
Are you talking yourself out of it right now?
No, not at all. But I just there's one fist bump and then there's everybody else is horrified. Yeah. Yeah.
It absolutely does sound horrifying.
Yeah. Yeah. No, so confidence. The only thing I've done is put money down. Right? And I'm just going to figure it out. And that's how I work. I'm a gut. I work from my gut. I know a lot of people are researchers. They would spend weeks or months or even years trying to figure this out. And I just go, okay, yep, that sounds right. I'm going to go do that, sign up for it. And then there's the, oh shit moment. How did I get myself into that? That comes later. I'm not quite there yet. I'm just now getting into the training mode for the Epic 5. And so that's.
I love it. I wing things too. I'm not a planner.
Yeah. Yeah.
I actually, when it comes to travel, I've always felt like if you want to go somewhere, but you keep I don't know if it's going to work or what have you. All you have to do is get online and buy the ticket. Just buy the ticket. And then that will force you to figure everything else out.
Mm-hmm. And I should say, I know this. Neither of us run our companies that way. Okay. So just if you come on one of these trips, we're not just go wing it. Trust us. No, that's not how we do it. There's a lot
I do wing it if I'm on a site visit. And I have invited people to go on site visits with me. I'm I have no idea what's going to go down. So if you're willing to sleep wherever and eat whatever, you can come with me.
I want to go on that trip. See, that's perfect.
I had one guy from Seattle do that. Oh,
not happy.
No, he couldn't handle it.
Literally not a happy camper.
No, he was not a happy camper. I remember at one point we were in this Kalenjin village in Kenya, and it was, granted, this was intense poverty. They were very, very poor people. But I was thrilled to be in the village. And we were there to figure out, you would love this. The Kalenjin are one of 3 cultures in the world that have running as part of their culture. You've probably heard of the Tarahumara in Mexico. They're another great running culture. And then the Four Corners Indians. But the Kalenjin, this Kenyan tribe, are fantastic runners. And so when you hear the Kenyans swept the podium again, they always do. It's this tribe. It's these people. And so we thought, well, the poverty's dire here. Maybe we could set up a running tourism program where people from around the world come. They get paired with their own Kalenjin running coach every morning for running in the Rift Valley, along with, the zebras and stuff. And then afternoons would be cultural activities. And will be these really cool, round kind of, thatched roof buildings for people to stay in. And wouldn't this be great? So that's why I was there. And so we're hanging out in the village, getting to know the people and figuring out where the land would be that we would buy and all this kind of stuff. But this guy that came with me, he just, oh my God, he was in over his head. To me, this was just I can hang out here, right? I had no problem with any of it. And his eyes turned to pies and he just glassed over. And when we left, he was on his phone all the time and he had satellite. He's I just found a hotel, Chris, and it's just can you drop me off there and I will catch up when you're all done with this, right? He's right? And I hadn't even thought twice about
I think he did come on one of my trips too.
Oh my God. Part of me felt sorry for him and part of me was just get out of here. I mean, I thought you were up for this. I don't have time, right? I'm here to work and you're holding me back.
Well, hopefully it was what do they call it? The type B or C fun where you don't have a good time when you're doing it, but then you can reflect back on it and you realize it wasn't so bad after all. So maybe he's had that.
I hope. I kind of didn't want to talk to him again.
Yeah. I know what you mean. I know just just time wise, I want to be respectful of people's time. And I also want to get to questions. If people do have questions, I want to do that. But I do want to touch upon something that is going to seem maybe a little bit out of the blue, but it stems from a conversation that you were having with Pam. I think it was Pam earlier about the elephants. And I want you to touch upon that because it was a viewpoint I'd never heard before, but it's a question that I get from people. So I would love to be able to direct people to this podcast episode and say, oh yeah, well, let me have you listen to this and hear a different perspective on the elephants. And this all goes back to being cognizant of the environment, of the animals in the environment. Because one of the questions that I get is, you cannot ride elephants in or visit this park because they're abusive to the animals, and you've got a great perspective on that. Can you share that?
Sure. I just wrote an article today that came out in our e-news. But so elephant tourism is really on the forefront of a lot of people's talking points right now. It's like, is it ethical? Is it not? How do we do this? Is it right to ride elephants and stuff? And so over the last couple of years, most people are like, oh, it's bad to ride elephants. So we got to stop that. The elephants are being abused. And so over the last several years, there's been a number of elephant sanctuaries that have come up. And these are opportunities for you to go meet elephants who have been rescued from the tourist trade and tourist shows where they take people around, and they get to live in these amazing parks. And so like 2 years ago, I was at one, and it sure looked great to me for the elephants. You show up and they bring the elephants in and you get to feed the elephants and like be right next to them. And then they kind of set them free in this big open area. And so you're walking around with the elephants and they're just going wherever they want. And then after about an hour and a half of that, you can just kind of sit in the brush and be near the elephants. It was incredible. It was totally relaxed. Then we walked down the hill with the elephants down to a road, and then we're walking with the elephants. And I'll never forget it. I had my camera. I'm doing this selfie video, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm walking with the elephant, And I've rode elephants years before. And I felt shameful, I'll admit, when I was on that. The mahout had this big, giant spear and it was hitting the elephant in the head with it. And I asked him not to do it repeatedly, and I felt horrid about the experience. Walking with the elephant, and they're just lumbering along and I'm with them. And it was thrilling. And then we go down to this area and they hose down the side of this hill. So it's muddy as all get out. And the elephants are just rolling in the mud and playing with each other. And then we all go into the river. And we throw water on them and bathe them, and they spray us with water, and everybody's laughing. It was this amazing experience. And the elephants looked happy. I was happy. But in reality, they're still performing, aren't they? They've got to do this in order to be fed and to be taken care of. Elephants are enormous animals. There's 3,000 elephants working in Thailand in the tourist trade. And so you can't just set them free. They would be trampling fields and they would be getting killed by farmers and things like that. So there's been this kind of backlash of they shouldn't have to be doing anything. They should just be free and people could encounter them. But what the recognition right now is, if we don't support the sanctuaries that are actually treating the animals really well, the only places where people will encounter elephants and be able to do it and pay for it will not be very ethical. And the people who will go to those, and there's plenty who will, especially, and I hate to say this, but the Chinese tourism trade is booming right now. And a lot of them, what I've heard from many operators in many countries that I've worked with, is the number one thing that they want is the selfie. And they're not as concerned about the animal welfare. So they're much more likely to get the selfie with a drugged tiger. I'm sure you've all seen these, right? Somebody's sitting right next to a tiger. That tiger is continually on drugs or in a cage. It's a horrid life. Swimming with dolphins. Do you know what happens? How they get those dolphins? It's horrid beyond belief. Watch The Cove. You would never, ever do it again. And if you saw how these elephants are taken in order to be trained to ride with tourists, you wouldn't do that either. But some people don't care. They just want the selfie. So if we say, oh, we're not going to support any of these organizations at all, then it leaves only the ones who don't care to furnish the tourism trade for those people who are unethical. So I hate to say it, but what I really realize is that I fear that these magnificent animals are going to have to earn their keep. A lot like a horse does, in the United States. They just don't run wild all over the place. They're very expensive to keep, and we've got to feed them. And so my feeling is, well, at least they could be in these enormous areas where they're absolutely adored and loved and fed and well taken care of. There's no chains. There's no spikes. They still have handlers. They're mahouts because they have that bond and they work with them. They're with them continually. So there's that strong relationship. And what I'm hoping is that I learned a lot about elephants on that trip, and everybody else did too. And so if we can educate people through animal tourism where it is, benefiting the elephants as well, then maybe it's a good thing. The alternative isn't great.
Right. And that's also different than the elephants people are riding the elephants up, like in India at Jaipur, I think it
Rajasthan.
is.
I've seen rows of elephants bringing the people up.
Right. And that's quite different.
But 2 or 3 people in that cage on an elephant, in all reality, that's about the weight of you carrying a 20-pound knapsack, a little small backpack. It's actually not that bad on them. They take the people up and then they get to walk back down and then hang out the rest of the day. It's not a terrible life, but what you wonder is how are the mahouts really dealing with them? Is it spikes and chains, like the separation that they do to get the young ones away from the mothers and train them is really bad. So it's really hard.
So she doesn't have an answer for you.
I think it's really tough. I think you have to make your own decision, about animal tourism and what you do. But certainly, I think some of these organizations are doing the best they can, and they're really trying hard to give you an opportunity to experience them, and hopefully they'll come back and be an elephant advocate, and really have an amazing experience. But I rode elephants twice, a long time ago, and both experiences left me feeling shamed, absolutely shamed.
Well, thanks for sharing that perspective too. That's good. Knowledge is power for sure.
Yeah, we all learn.
Is there anything that we haven't? I mean, we've talked about a lot of things, and I know that we could. I joked before. I know that we could talk until midnight. But is there anything specifically that you wanted to chat about or bring up?
I think I just love to open it up to questions if anybody has any.
Okay,
yeah.
So I have a couple quick questions before we shut this down for a moment, and then we'll open it back up to questions. But I always end conversations with, what does it mean to you to be bold?
Yeah, I think, honestly, to do things you don't know you can do.
How do you know what those things are? Because you said before that you challenge yourself and you want to remain as active and vibrant and interesting and educated in your later years. How do you know what that is? Are you presented with something and you think like, I could never do that. Okay, I'm going to do that. Or do you read the newspapers and the activity section and go, okay, what can I do this weekend that I've never done before?
I think it's a combination, right? You get presented with things and opportunities. Just last summer, my brother had a, what are they called? They're a flyboard. You put your feet on it, and then it's hooked to a jet ski, and then you fly around. I was like, oh, that looks so cool.
Did you do it?
Yes, I did. Of course, I had to. But the funny thing, though, is that at this age, I'm finding myself often saying, can I? Yes. Should I?
You have to
like I don't want to hurt myself either, right? If I fall now, I mean, it just is different. You don't.
Well, you put your helmet on.
You put your helmet on. I will tell you, they were telling me how difficult it is and how you can get body slammed really bad, and it's really painful, and because you're going so fast, it's like But then I watched him where he did this thing where you don't go full board. You just kind of go up to here, so the water's like right here, and if you lean forward, you just get to go through the water like this, like Poseidon. And I was like, oh, I just want to go around like that. I just want to be the mermaid, right? So I got in and I'm zooming through like this, and I thought, oh, this is easier than I just have good balance. So I started zooming up and then diving down, like go up like 15 feet and dive down, and you can porpoise. Oh my God, I have to admit, that was a lot of fun. Obviously, I had no idea if I could do it or not, but like I just decided to start studying the Blackfeet language. I'm part Blackfeet, so it's incredibly difficult. But I'm exploring areas of my spirituality and the Blackfeet religion, and I'm moving in that direction. And I have no idea what I'm doing. And half the time I make mistakes. But I think the main thing is that you just have to be willing to eat humble pie.
Have you ever seen the Jim Carrey movie, Yes Man?
No, but I already like it.
No, you haven't? Oh, it's my yearly. I have to watch.
Yes Man.
I have to watch Yes Man every year, and if you haven't seen it, you must watch it. It is so, whether you're a Jim Carrey fan or not, it is so life affirming, and it's with Zoe Deschanel, who is just like the cutest, and it's so amazing because he goes through this phase where he has to say yes to everything, and it makes you realize how many things you say no to, and if you just catch yourself and you think, why am I saying no to this? Then you might turn it around and say yes.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
So we can find Chris at crookedtrails.org and Facebook. Do you guys have a Facebook page?
We do.
Do you have an Instagram?
We do. I'm not as active as I should be. I'm terrible about social media.
That's good because you're living life. You're saying yes. You're saying yes to everything. Yeah. Well, we'll find you, and I'll link to that in the show notes to wherever we can find you.
Thanks,
and
Beth.
We'll still record the Q&As, but we'll take a little break. And I just want to thank you again for all the great inspiration and all just the laughter and all the wonderful things that you do.
Thanks, Beth.
So I'm not quite sure. I don't think these aren't directed to one or the other of us. So we can just dive in. We're nice and relaxed here. What is the most uncomfortable situation you've been faced with in your travels? And that was from Stacy.
That's really interesting because uncomfortable, like sometimes you get yourself in a situation that is dangerous and so you're uncomfortable. Other times there is male attention that makes you uncomfortable. But I'll be honest, I think the most uncomfortable I've ever been was when I was in the hill tribes and we were hiking from village to village and we had these monks with us. And many monks, I come to find out, have a lot of repressed sexual energy. And I had befriended this one. I really liked him, Kosown, and we became very good friends. And so I was just engaging with him the way I do. And he mistook that engagement for a sexual interest. And we were all having these, what we were calling solos. And we had our little solo areas that we were in. And so I was doing my solo in the jungle. And he comes walking down the path. And I remember thinking, what are you doing? We're supposed to be in solos right now. And he comes walking right up to me. He sits down and just proceeds to essentially attack me. And I didn't take that very, very well. And then and what was really awful was he was shocked. He was shocked because he completely misread my expressions of, friendship and interest. And I think because he's a monk and he's got all these sexual feelings repressed. And I felt incredibly uncomfortable. I was being sexually assaulted, although I completely offended myself. But then, as a lot of women do, how did I misguide this man? And then you question yourself, and then you wonder what messages you're sending out. Am I too friendly? Am I too open? How did I get myself into this situation? And it was awful. It really was, because it also just really, I, like many people, had this high idea of monks. So then I had this reality check, and then I had a lot of stuff went spinning through my head for the rest of that solo. I was very uncomfortable. What about you?
Well, the interesting thing is that when I think, I'm not quite sure how to take uncomfortable. So I don't think of that kind of situation, but I think of like physically uncomfortable, like being without my protein powder in Morocco, No, but that's how I think about it. And then what I really think about, and this has like been kind of lesson learned over time and maturity and financial ability, is that, and it's funny, I'm working on a book right now that's a bit of a memoir of my travels. And so I'm going back in time for my first trip. It was actually, my first trip was to India and Nepal during that trek I was talking about earlier. But I remember being in India and staying at hotels, and even in Bangkok, staying at hotels, paying $2 a night in these places. And it's a brick wall, in Bangkok, brick wall with a fan with no windows.
Cockroaches.
And just oppressive heat. And so that to me is uncomfortable. Or being in India, again, paying $2 a night, not having hot water, when they promise you, madam, that there's hot water, and the walls are so thin that you can hear the people next door snoring and
having sex usually.
And having sex, yeah. But that to me,
alone.
yeah. I was with a boyfriend that I was fighting with. So
that's even worse.
Yeah. But that to me is uncomfortable. And, I will say that, backpacker $2 a night, of course, pretty much anything is an upgrade from that. But being able to travel a little bit more comfortably does make a big difference. And that's why on our tours, especially when we go to a place like India, we're staying in much nicer hotels, because I know what it's like to go back to a hotel room after a day of being assaulted, by the sounds and the smells and the noise of India. You want a place to kind of land comfortably. And that's a big lesson. Even if it's a $15 a night hotel, that's going to be an upgrade from the $2 a night. So that to me is uncomfortable. So, okay. During a recent trip to Bali, we brought water bottles to use, but found we had to fill them with plastic water containers. What's a purifying device that could have helped us? I'm going to let you answer that.
Yeah. So almost anywhere you can fill up your water bottle in, the sink, like your bathroom sink or what have you. And there's several different devices that you can carry, something as cheap as $6.99 potable agua tablets all the way up to a SteriPen, which we've got Vanna White over here explaining them. But I really love the SteriPen. I've been using them for 15 years. It's a device that uses ultraviolet light. You fill up your water bottle anywhere you want. You stick the device in. It turns on automatically. It stirs around. You just agitate the water for 90 seconds. You pop it out. It's clean. And it depends on how much your water bottle is. But yeah, and it'll turn off automatically. And the little LED has a smiley face and tells you, hey, it's clean. And if you pulled it out too soon, it'll give you a frowny face and like, don't drink.
Yeah.
It's just excellent. The other thing that she's holding right here is a Grail. And a Grail acts a lot like a coffee press. You simply pull out the fill that up with water, and then you shove that inside and you push down. You're actually using physical pressure to push the filter through the water. And then what comes up in the middle is then clean and purified water. There's many different things. I've just discovered a new one that's literally this size. It's called an O-Pen. Uses ozone. You stick it in the water, you stir it around, little bubbles come up, clean. There's incredible techniques out there, and so that's fantastic. One of the things I love to do is talk to hotels that I stay in and say, hey, what would be really great is if you get rid of these little individual bottles and you have filtered water in a big giant, 5-gallon container that we can fill up from. Oh, well, I make money from selling those bottles. Why don't you sell reusable bottles with your logo on it that then people walk around with forever and show your,
Oh, you just have an answer for everything, Chris.
I do. You could make a lot more money if you did this, and you'd also earn the respect of your travelers. So there's lots of different techniques. You can go to travelersagainstplastic.org and click on gear, and it'll explain all the different things that I've tested myself that work great.
Thank you. I grabbed the SteriPen from Pam because I want to tell a funny story. I had a group climbing up Kilimanjaro a couple of years ago. And, I encourage everyone to bring something like a SteriPen. I happen to be a big fan of the SteriPen, but I can't wait to check out that O-Pen. That sounds
great. They're made in Wisconsin.
That sounds really cool. So I had a gal on the Kilimanjaro trek, and she made it up to the top. Up to Uhuru Peak, and she started to feel sick, and she was headed down. She got very sick, and of course, we kind of thought it was altitude sickness because that would be the natural thing, but she didn't have quite those symptoms. And she had to be evacuated down the mountain, and she was taken down by these stretchers that they have, and so she was brought down. And what we found out was that she got Giardia. And if anybody's had it, it's like you're very gassy. You've got eggy tasting burps. It's really kind of gross. I had it years and years ago. And she said, Beth, I think I know what happened. I was using the SteriPen like this. And for listeners, I'm holding the SteriPen with the cap on it. She forgot to take the cap off, which just comes right off, and actually use the interior part, which is the thing that works. Love you, Betsy, but yeah, that's she forgot to do that. So she was drinking her water for the first day or two from the tap, using the SteriPen without taking the tap off. So yeah, but she was great. She took one pill. There's a pill that you can't get in the United States that you can get elsewhere that knocks out the Giardia, and that's what she took. And she felt great the next day when we saw her when we ended down. So anyway, I just thought that I would share that. So always take the cap off the SteriPen. There's a lesson learned. Okay, so next question. What if you say yes, like a good Jim Carrey person, and then find yourself in a situation/country that you can't handle? Is there a plan B?
There's always a plan B. And I'm the wing it girl. I mean, I've backed out of a number of things, yeah, you say yeah and you're like, oh, this was not a good thing to say yeah to. And I think this is absolutely critical for most women. We often say yes for whatever it is that we're going to say yes, but then we're not quite sure how to say no later and back out. And you have to own your intuition. I'll bet every single one of you has done something where suddenly you're like, I probably shouldn't be doing this, but you ignored it and you went forward because whatever was going on in your head told you, I can't back out now. You can. You have to own your intuition and recognize when you've made a mistake. I backed out of a number of things, once I got going, realizing, no, well, this was pretty stupid. I better get out of this. And then I do. Be fearless about that. There's nothing that you can't get out of.
When I was writing my first book, Wanderlust and Lipstick, The Essential Guide for Women Traveling Solo, I interviewed probably 40 plus women for that book. And the couple of women who told me about problems that they had on the road, as in nearly raped, or they had someone coming to their hotel room, trying to get into the room, staff member or something, and they were very, very frightened. They all told me, I knew I shouldn't have done it. I knew I shouldn't have gotten in the taxi, but I didn't want to be rude. And that's the problem, especially with women, is that we are brought up to be nice. And we think that being rude or telling someone no, even when our gut is telling us something different, that we don't want to say no. Today for the podcast, I recorded with this woman, Kelly Herron, and she used to live in Seattle. She was attacked in a bathroom out on a run, and she was nearly raped. She'll be a podcast episode in the coming weeks. And she said what happened was somebody approached her in the bathroom, this homeless man, and she turned around and saw him, and she said she nearly apologized to him, like she was in his way, because she was at the heater just drying her hands. She was at the dryer drying her hands off, and her first instinct was to apologize to him, and he was in the women's room, and then he tried to rape her. So that's what happens to us, and we just we do have to be solid with our gut and
your gut will always tell you. I think you have to trust your intuition. Absolutely.
And in that case, just say no.
Yeah.
Yeah, just say no. Okay, this is a great question. What do people overpack the most? What item do they overpack the most?
Oh, clothes.
Shoes. Shoes.
Yeah, that's in there.
I always tell people never travel with more than 2 pairs of shoes. One pair that you wear and one that goes in your bag, unless you're doing something special, like maybe running or going to see the Queen of England or something. But 2 pairs of shoes, max.
Yeah, that's true. Women do pack a lot, but I'll be honest. I often bring 3.
Are you running? You're hiking.
No, but I'm hiking, and then I'll want some flip flops, and then I wear chacos everywhere. And the flip flops are just easy to get in and out of, and I love them for cruising around in the hotels. But chacos are what I spend most of my time in, and so I often bring 3.
We have a Airbnb in our house in our basement area, daylight basement, and it's funny if we have to go in while the person is staying or the people are staying, maybe to clean or grab the garbage or something. The ladies, makeup everywhere, makeup and lotions all over the place. It is quite funny. So that's an overpacking thing for sure. And you know what else? While we're on the topic. If I'm traveling domestically, I pack more than I'm traveling internationally. Do you do that?
I do too.
If I go to Portland, the trunk is filled with crap because you never know.
You just keep tossing it. I might need that.
I know. I might want to learn how to knit. I might want to bring all that stuff. Who knows?
I need that backgammon board.
I know. The 12 magazines I haven't had time to read. They're all going. I'm telling you. Okay, last question.
And I have one other that a woman asked.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah, sorry about that. So have you ever had to medically evacuate a client on a tour?
Yes, 3 times.
Wow, where?
Peru, we had 2 high altitude sickness cases. We were at 13,000 feet, and one had high altitude pulmonary edema, and it was classic. Like I was a trained EMT. I've taken wilderness first responder. I've taken every medical class there is. And they always say if you listen to the lungs, it sounds like Rice Krispies. And I listened to this guy's lungs, and it was just like Rice Krispies as his breathing. I'm like, you going down now, right? And then another high altitude case. This was high altitude cerebral edema and swelling in the brain. And obviously can be deadly, but evacuate quickly. The great thing about that is, with high altitude, you just have to get down, and it heals so quickly. There's no lingering
as long
effects.
as you're not right. As long as you're not sick in a valley, and you have to go up either way.
Yeah, this was not. It was all downhill, which was great, and downhill ended up at a high altitude clinic, and so everything was great. And then we had an evacuation in India, heading over some mountain passes, and that was like, 15,000 feet. And there was just a lot of dust in the air and really dry. And the person was experiencing severe respiratory distress. And that was a challenging one because it was like, get him on the donkey. We did have to go over a huge pass. It was 5 days to get this person evacuated. And then from there down to India. So this was a slow evacuation. And how many of you have been to Machu Picchu? Have you seen that Huayna Picchu that sits behind it? Okay, well, this is a terrifyingly steep little thing that you can climb up to the top of. And I was up there one time and with Tammy and Dan, and then we came down and we were kind of coming around the backside, and I heard, thunk, boom, and I thought, oh shit, someone fell off the freaking top. And it's like 3,000 feet straight down, right? And I heard the fall, and so we went down, and this person, completely unconscious at this point, because she had like thunk, hit, thunk, flat, and then landed. She landed 2 feet from the edge of a 3,000 foot drop, and she was caught in the bamboo. And we did the evacuation.
And she still had her selfie stick up.
Talking about a difficult evacuation. Oh my God.
Was that a helicopter?
No, you can't land anything up there. So it's like we started to construct a gurney out of bamboo and weave it together to try and get her out of there. And some of the people in the area, they're like, don't worry, they'll bring a gurney up. But it took 45 minutes for somebody else to get up there, strap her in, an hour to get her down to Machu Picchu, and then another 45 minutes to get down the train. The trains are on strike, so it took an hour to convince them. Remember this? To get her on the train. Well, then once the train was going, it was a big fight. Everybody wanted on the train, and they were like, no, it's just for the injured lady. Oh my God. And then it goes back to Ollantaytambo, and then you've got to get all the way to Cusco. It's like another hour and a half.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, longer.
She survived.
Wow.
She was an Australian woman, but she was in bad shape.
That sounds bad. For my part, I would say I don't think we've had any medical evacuations, but I wish that we had some evacuations. And I will leave that right there.
You evacuated. I hear you there.
I've tried.
I'm going to call a helicopter for you, honey.
Yeah. If I could, I would have. Yeah. You have a question from someone?
Yeah. I was asked, what fear do you have to overcome? Which fear do you need to overcome? And I didn't know if it was for me personally or for in general that people need to overcome when they're traveling. So I kind of took it that way. But I really feel that it's fear of the unknown. And I think that a lot of people look at things and think that they can't do it because they don't know it. It always amazes me. Like I just had a group of 30 people in Kenya, and we were building a soccer field. I thought it'd be fun to create this program called The World Through Soccer, where we build a soccer field every year in a different country. So this year was Kenya. And so we had the people out there, but 4 weeks before everyone's supposed to depart, there's the bombing. You may have heard about that. And a lot of people died. It was at a really nice hotel. And so the clients that I have are terrified, obviously, to go. But I think it's because that's the enemy that they don't know. You know what I mean? You're much more likely to die in a terrorist attack in this country. But this country, you feel fine in this country, but you're much more likely to be shot in this country than in any other country you could possibly go to, except maybe, I don't know, Somalia, right? I mean, this is the least safe of the countries, but you know it, you're familiar with it. So I think it's the unknown that we need to overcome. I think that's the biggest fear for all of us.
I'll let you answer that. I mean, just kind of leave it at that because I don't know. Like, I'm not sure. I have a different relationship with fear. Like, there's things I won't do. I'm not going to jump out of an airplane. right?
Oh, I did. It was awesome.
Yeah, I wouldn't do it. No, anything where I could actually die, I have no interest in doing that.
You could, that's my point. You could do that walking down the street. Like, I don't see any reason not to do those things but I, in general, personally, I don't experience fear very much at all. It's incredibly rare. I find it an incredible waste of time, and I just don't indulge in it. The same with jealousy. That's such a waste of your time. And so those two things I just don't bother with. I don't experience fear very much. Yeah.
I can't add anything to it. I mean, I feel fear when I think about jumping out of an airplane.
I feel fear when I think about running 150 miles across the desert.
No, I have no fear about that.
I'd rather fly out of an airplane.
Across the desert.
Yeah.
Hi, Beth.
Superman style.
Yeah. Any other questions before we wrap up? Good. Like my watch says 9:00 on the button. That's
dot.
Amazing. Yeah. Thanks so much, everybody, for coming. Really appreciate it. Oh, I hope you enjoyed that conversation. I'd love to know what you thought about that live format, as I'd love to do more of these if they resonate with you. Send me a note via social media or to beth@shesboldpodcast.com. You can find Chris at crookedtrails.org and travellersagainstplastic.org. For these links and for links to all the things we chatted about in this episode, go to shesboldpodcast.com/episodes, and there you will find the show notes for this and all of the other conversations. You can also find those links and show notes in whatever podcast app it is you're using to listen to this. Don't forget to check out my Patreon page. It's basically a way for you to say, yes, I like what I'm hearing on the She's Bold podcast, and I'm willing to support the show and get some special benefits. When you become a patron, you unlock bonus content such as questions I ask of guests after we complete the episode, and those are a lot of fun to listen to. You can find out more by going to shesboldpodcast.com/Patreon. You can connect with me by friending me on Facebook, and I'm Wandergal, and Beth Witwa on Instagram. Wandergal is where you'll see my travel photos, and Beth Witwa, it's BETHWHITWA. That's where you'll see more personal posts and images of me and my travels, podcast guests, and all sorts of other fun things. Ladies, you can join the Be Bold Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/Be Bold group for support and encouragement for whatever ways you're trying to be bold. Thanks for joining me for another episode of the She's Bold podcast. Until next time, be bold.